The sea was wide, dark, and silent. Only the creak of old wood and the soft sound of waves broke the still air. The moon hung low, pale and cold, shining on the black water like silver dust. The night wind carried the smell of salt, wet rope, and tar. A small lantern swung gently from a hook on the main deck, its yellow light moving like a heartbeat. Near it, a pirate stood wrapped in a heavy coat that barely kept away the freezing wind. His hands were rough from rope burns, and his beard glistened with ice. Every breath left a thin cloud that drifted away into the dark. Above him, the sails were stiff with frost, and the ropes crackled as they moved. The whole ship seemed to breathe slowly, like an animal resting in the cold. He looked up at the stars. They were sharp and endless, scattered across the black sky. Somewhere below deck, he could hear men snoring, coughing, or turning in their hammocks. The ship rocked softly, like a cradle in the arms of the sea. Out here, sleep was never simple. It came in small pieces, stolen between duties. The cold tried to chase it away, but exhaustion always won in the end. The pirate rubbed his hands and sat down on a barrel, closing his eyes for a moment. The wood under him was frozen, but he didn't move. For men who lived their lives at sea, a few quiet minutes under the stars were as precious as gold. The world was vast, the night was endless, and yet this moment felt small, like a secret only the ocean could keep. If you could walk across that ship now, you would hear almost nothing. The deck would whisper under your feet. The ropes would sway and hum softly in the wind. The waves would rise and fall, but even they seemed slower, quieter, as if the sea itself was half asleep. The cold had covered everything, barrels, planks, even the metal nails, in a thin skin of frost. The world felt still, as if holding its breath. In moments like this, the pirates spoke little. They saved their words for daylight, when work and danger returned. At night, their silence was a kind of peace. A few men stayed awake, keeping watch near the railing. They wore layers of wool and leather, but the wind found its way through every gap. Their faces were red and numb. They stared into the darkness, not really looking for anything, just listening to the ocean, to the creak of the mast, to their own hearts beating under their coats. On calm nights, some men whispered stories of warm harbors, of women left behind, of fires that never went out. Others said nothing, lost in their thoughts. The deck was a strange world, caught between sleep and waking. Above, the sky seemed endless. Below, the sea was black and deep. Somewhere in between floated this small piece of wood and life, a fragile island in the cold. The pirate at the helm rubbed his eyes. His shift would end soon. Below deck, the hammocks waited, swaying gently. He imagined the warmth of his blanket, the sound of quiet breathing, the soft rocking that made sleep come faster. Soon, he thought, just a little longer. But for now, he stood still, listening to the sea's slow voice. Out here, everything moved in rhythm. The waves, the ship, the wind, even their tired hearts. Now, let's go below deck. The air changes the moment you step inside. The sharp cold of the night turns into something heavy, warm and thick. The smell hits first, salt, damp wood and sweat. The narrow hallway is lined with ropes, barrels and old tools. The walls are dark and shiny from years of smoke and sea air. Oil lamps hang low, swinging gently with every movement of the ship. Their light is soft and golden, painting slow shadows across the men who try to rest. Dozens of hammocks hang close together like rows of floating cocoons. Inside them, pirates sleep in their clothes, boots still on, knives tied to their belts. Some snore loudly, others lie still, their faces turned to the wall. The floor is wet in some places, sticky in others. Drops of seawater fall from the boards above. The sound of the sea never stops. Even down here you can hear it, the slow beat of waves against the hull, the whisper of wind through the cracks. But for men who live on ships, these sounds are comfort. They are reminders that the sea still holds them, still carries them forward. The air is warmer here, but not comfortable. It smells of oil, smoke, and the faint sweetness of old rum. Every breath feels thick. Yet, for the pirates, this place is safety. No wind, no icy rain, no open sky, just the steady rhythm of wood and wave. Some men dream of land while they sleep. Others don't dream at all. For them, sleep is only a pause, a few hours between darkness and duty. The hammocks sway softly, and the ship moves with them. It feels almost like the sea is cradling its children.
In the long winters, warmth was not just a comfort, it was survival. Out in the open sea, far from any port or fire, the cold could crawl into a man's bones and never leave. The pirates knew this well. They had no fireplaces, no thick blankets, no soft beds waiting for them. Everything they owned had to fit within a few feet of space. So they learned to make warmth from what little they had. Old coats from captured sailors, bits of wool stolen from merchant ships, scraps of fur traded at foreign docks, these became treasures. Some pirates even lined their coats with old sailcloth to block the wind. When a man found a dry pair of socks, it was like finding gold. On the coldest nights, they slept close to one another. Hammocks hung so near that a man could feel the breath of the one beside him. Their bodies made a kind of shared heat, a silent alliance against the cold. The air below deck was heavy, sometimes too warm, thick with the smell of sweat and damp wood. But to them, that heat meant safety. The cold could not reach so deep when men huddled together, shoulder to shoulder, heartbeat to heartbeat. Some pirates even lined their coats with old sailcloth to block the wind. When a man found a dry pair of socks, it was like finding gold. On the coldest nights, they slept close to one another. Hammocks hung so near that a man could feel the breath of the one beside him. Their bodies made a kind of shared heat, a silent alliance against the cold. The air below deck was heavy, sometimes too warm, thick with the smell of sweat and damp wood. But to them, that heat meant safety. The cold could not reach so deep when men huddled together, shoulder to shoulder, heartbeat to heartbeat. Some pirates even lined their coats with old sailcloth to block the wind. When a man found a dry pair of socks, it was like finding gold. On the coldest nights, they slept close to one another. Hammocks hung so near that a man could feel the breath of the one beside him. Their bodies made a kind of shared heat, a silent alliance against the cold. The air below deck was heavy, sometimes too warm, thick with the smell of sweat and damp wood. But to them, that heat meant safety. The cold could not reach so deep when men huddled together, shoulder to shoulder, heartbeat to heartbeat. Some pirates even lined their coats with old sailcloth to block the wind. When a man found a dry pair of socks, it was like finding gold. On the coldest nights, they slept close to one another. Hammocks hung so near that a man could feel the breath of the one beside him. Their bodies made a kind of shared heat, a silent alliance against the cold.
The air below deck was heavy, sometimes too warm, thick with the smell of sweat and damp wood. But to them, that heat meant safety. The cold could not reach so deep when men huddled together, shoulder to shoulder, heartbeat to heartbeat. Some pirates even lined their coats with old sailcloth to block the wind. When a man found a dry pair of socks, it was like finding gold. On the coldest nights, they slept close to one another. Hammocks hung so near that a man could feel the breath of the one beside him. Their bodies made a kind of shared heat, a silent alliance against the cold. The air below deck was heavy, sometimes too warm, thick with the smell of sweat and damp wood. But to them, that heat meant safety. The cold could not reach so deep when men huddled together, shoulder to shoulder, heartbeat to heartbeat. When darkness covered the ocean and the wind softened, the world of a pirate changed. Above the deck, the sea whispered like an old friend, low, endless, and alive. The sound of the waves against the hull was constant, steady and deep, like a giant's breathing. To those who lived their lives at sea, it was the closest thing to a lullaby. The rocking of the ship, the soft creak of wood, the slow beat of water. Together they made a rhythm that no land could ever offer. For many pirates, this was the sound of safety. As long as the sea sang, the ship still floated, and they were still alive. But not all sounds were gentle. Sometimes the wind changed its voice, rising to a long, lonely cry. The ropes would groan, the masts would bend, and the sails would slap against the cold air. Even in their sleep, pirates could tell what kind of night it was just by the sound. A calm night meant slow breathing, soft snores, and peace. A restless night meant footsteps above, the heavy roll of waves, the clatter of barrels shifting. Yet somehow they learned to rest through it all. To a man of the sea, silence was the only sound that brought fear, for silence meant the storm was about to begin. Some pirates said they could hear voices in the sea, not real ones, or at least not human. The waves made shapes of sound that could fool the ear, whispers that rose and fell, sighs that seemed to come from beneath the water. On moonless nights, when even the stars hid behind clouds, those whispers felt close. Men spoke of spirits of drowned sailors, or the cries of ships long lost. But rather than fear them, most found comfort in these tales. The sea was their home, and if ghosts lived there too, then they were simply neighbors. Inside the lower deck, the music of the ship continued. The hammocks creaked, the wood joints popped softly, and water dripped from the ceiling. Sometimes a rat scurried by, its claws clicking faintly on the planks. Someone turned over, muttering in his sleep. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of tar and salt and damp cloth. Yet in that strange mix of sounds and scents, there was calm. The pirates had lived with chaos for so long that even disorder felt natural. Their minds, trained by the rhythm of the waves, began to drift as the ocean rocked them gently to dreams. For a few short hours, they were not thieves or fighters. They were simply men breathing in time with the sea. Some dreamed of faraway shores, of taverns filled with laughter, of warm beds, of women whose faces they had forgotten. Others dreamed of nothing at all, lost in deep black sleep where the sea itself seemed to cradle them. And sometimes just before waking, they could almost feel the difference, that delicate line between man and ocean, between life and the slow, rocking heartbeat of the ship. The morning would come soon enough, bringing orders, storms, or cannon fire. But for now, there was only this: the sound of the waves, the whisper of ropes, the slow, calm pulse of a world made entirely of water. To a pirate, that sound was more than peace. It was home.
The sea could be cruel in winter. When the wind turned sharp and the waves grew hard as glass, even the strongest pirate felt the cold sink into his bones. The ships of that time were never built for comfort. They were made for speed, strength, and survival. There were no cozy rooms or heated chambers, only wooden walls that leaked air through every crack. On the coldest nights, when frost gathered on the ropes and the sea looked like black steel, warmth became a rare and precious thing. Pirates learned to make do with what they had. They wore layers, old wool, rough linen, and bits of fur stolen from merchants' coats. Some wrapped themselves in blankets patched with sailcloth. Others stuffed straw inside their shirts for insulation, a trick borrowed from farmers and soldiers alike. When the wind blew through the boards, they pressed their backs against barrels or coiled ropes for shelter. The thick hemp of the rigging held the day's warmth longer than bare wood. Every scrap, every corner became part of their battle against the cold. Fire was dangerous on a wooden ship, so they could not rely on it. A small lantern burned low, giving more light than heat. Cooking was done in a metal box on deck where the smoke could escape. At night they sometimes warmed their hands over it before the last embers died. After that, they depended on their bodies. Some slept close together, shoulder to shoulder, sharing heat like animals in a cave. It was not pride, but necessity. The cold did not care for rank or name. It treated all men the same. The sound of the wind was different in winter. It howled through the rigging like a living thing. The sails cracked like thunder when frost stiffened their edges. Below deck, the cold seemed to creep from the floor up. Breath turned to mist. The hammock swayed slowly, carrying the men through dreams half frozen. In such moments, warmth was more than comfort, it was hope. The pirates learned to hold on to small things, a dry blanket, a swallow of rum, the soft warmth of wool against the skin. These were the treasures that mattered more than gold. Sometimes they made small rituals to feel less helpless. Before sleeping, a man might rub his hands together until the sting faded. Another might whisper a sailor's prayer, asking the sea to spare them its worst. Others drank just enough rum to bring a little fire inside their chests. They knew too much could numb their senses, so they sipped carefully, letting the warmth spread slowly through their veins. The night would still be long, but the edge of its bite grew softer. When storms came, the cold turned cruel. Wet clothes clung to their skin, and boots froze stiff. Sleep was nearly impossible. They took turns resting in short bursts, wrapping themselves in anything dry. The sound of rain and wind outside became part of their dreams, blending with their own slow breathing. Yet, even then, the pirates did not curse the sea. They accepted its nature as one might accept an old friend's temper, unpredictable but familiar. By dawn, when the first thin light touched the horizon, they arose from their hammocks stiff and pale. The cold had taken its toll, but they were still there. And in the quiet between night and morning, when frost glittered on the deck and the world seemed made of silver, they felt something close to peace. For surviving another winter night at sea was not just endurance, it was a quiet victory. When morning finally came, it did not rush. It crept slowly across the sea, pale and hesitant, like a candle trying to light an empty room. The horizon turned from black to blue, then to a faint shade of silver. The pirates stirred one by one, their breath still visible in the cold air. The world outside their hammocks was quiet, except for the low hum of the wind and the gentle crack of ice melting on the ropes. After a long, frozen night, even that thin light felt like a gift.
Their bodies were stiff, wrapped in layers that smelled of salt, smoke, and damp wool. Fingers numb, faces raw from the wind, yet none of them complained. Complaining never made the cold softer. Instead, they moved slowly, rubbing their hands together, stretching sore muscles, and sharing small glances that said, "We made it through another night." For men who lived each day by chance, survival itself was reason enough for gratitude. The deck above was slippery with frost. Those assigned to early watch stepped carefully, their boots crunching against thin ice. The first rays of sunlight touched the masts and turned them to gold for a brief moment. It was a quiet beauty, one that only those who had suffered the long night could truly appreciate. The smell of salt mixed with a faint hint of smoke from the galley, where someone was already coaxing a small fire back to life. Soon there would be warmth again. Not much, but enough to start the day. A pirate's morning was simple. They didn't speak much at first. Some washed their faces in seawater, gasping at its chill. Others sipped the last of last night's rum, letting the burn chase away the cold. The cook handed out hard biscuits, sometimes softened with a bit of warm broth if they were lucky. It wasn't fine food, but after such a night, even the roughest meal tasted like comfort. They ate slowly, in silence, the rhythm of chewing blending with the creak of the ship. As the light grew stronger, the sea began to move again, no longer a dark, still mirror, but a soft, rolling expanse of blue. The gulls returned, calling faintly from above, and their voices carried far in the thin winter air. The pirates looked out over the endless water, eyes narrow from the wind, and for a few moments they forgot about the cold. They were men of the sea, and this was their world, harsh, vast, and endlessly alive. Some took quiet pleasure in small tasks, tightening a rope, folding a sail, mending a tear in their clothes. These movements brought warmth back into their bodies. The ship slowly came to life. Footsteps on the deck, murmured orders, the splash of water as someone scrubbed the boards clean. The sun was weak but steady, painting everything in a soft gold light that glowed on the worn wood and tired faces. It was not comfort in the way the land offered it, but it was enough. By mid-morning, the memory of the freezing night began to fade. The pirates joked quietly, sharing stories or humming old songs from distant ports. The rhythm of the day had begun again, a rhythm they all knew by heart. The sea, once a threat, had turned gentle once more, and in that calm, fleeting warmth they found a strange kind of peace. For as long as the sun shone and the waves stayed kind, they belonged to the world in a way no man on land ever could. Life on a pirate ship was never truly quiet, but there were moments when it came close. After the morning chores were done, after the sails were set and the deck cleaned, a softer rhythm filled the ship. The wind hummed in the ropes, and the waves moved with slow, steady grace. The men had learned to live inside that rhythm, to breathe with it. And in those calm hours, when the cold sunlight drifted across the deck, they found small ways to stay human. They laughed, though not loudly. Their laughter was the kind that came from tired men, low, rough, and real. It rolled like the sea itself, spreading warmth where the sun could not reach. Some told stories from their old lives on land, stories of taverns, of lost loves, of villages left behind. Most of those stories were half true at best, but no one minded. The telling was what mattered. It reminded them that before they were pirates, they had been sons, brothers, or husbands. Songs were their greatest comfort. In the cold evenings, when work slowed and the light turned blue, someone would start a tune. A sea shanty, old and worn, known by nearly every man aboard. Voices would join one by one, rough, off-key, but full of life. The songs carried through the ship like a fire in the dark. They sang of storms, of distant harbors, of women who waited or never had.
They sang because it made the endless sea feel smaller, and because the act of singing itself kept the cold away. The rhythm of the music matched the rhythm of the waves, slow, steady, and eternal. Between the verses there were long, peaceful silences. Some men leaned back against the rail, watching the horizon fade into mist. Others sat cross-legged, mending clothes, or carving small bits of wood into shapes, a bird, a coin, a tiny ship. These small creations gave them something to hold on to, something that felt their own in a world that was always moving. The sea took so much from them, time, warmth, comfort, but it could not take their stories or their songs. At night, when the stars came out, their companionship grew even quieter. The cold air was sharp, but the sight above them was worth it. The sky seemed endless, filled with more light than any city could ever hold. The men would speak softly then, voices barely louder than the creak of the masts. They would point out constellations, each with its own tale. Some said they saw the souls of dead sailors shining above, guides for those still alive below. There was something sacred about those moments. The sea was both enemy and friend, and the men understood it better than anyone on land ever could. They had seen it angry and calm, cruel and kind, and in the company of others who had shared that same life, they found comfort that words could not fully explain. When the songs ended and the laughter faded, the quiet returned. The sea kept moving, the ship kept rocking, and the pirates lay in their hammocks once more. They did not speak. They did not need to. In that deep stillness, bound by the endless water and the cold night air, they were not alone.
When you live your life on the water, death never feels far away. The sea could turn against a man in a single heartbeat. A strong gust of wind, a broken rope, a sudden storm, that was all it took. Yet for pirates, this closeness to danger did not always bring fear. It brought a strange kind of calm. They learned to live with the idea that every day might be their last. And instead of fighting that truth, they accepted it the way they accepted the movement of the waves, steady, endless, and beyond their control. At night, when the ship was quiet and the stars stretched wide across the sky, many of them would lie awake in their hammocks, listening to the deep breathing of the sea. In that darkness, thoughts came slowly, drifting like clouds. Some wondered if they would die at sea, buried beneath the waves that had carried them so far. Others wondered if it mattered. To be taken by the ocean, the same force that had fed them, moved them, and sung them to sleep, felt almost natural. It was not a gentle thought, but it was not a cruel one either. It was simply part of the rhythm of things. They had seen shipmates vanish into the depths, swallowed by storms or struck down in battle. At first it hurt deeply, but over time sorrow softened into understanding. The sea gave and took without reason. To live upon it was to belong to it, and all men of the sea knew that one day they would return to it. Some said the ocean remembered every sailor it took, that in the whisper of the waves you could still hear their voices, not in words, but in feeling. Despite this closeness to death, pirates were not grim men. They laughed, they sang, they lived fiercely because they never knew when their time would end. The knowledge of death gave more meaning to every small comfort. A warm drink, a calm sunset, a shared joke on a frozen morning. To them, life was made of moments, not years. They counted not their age, but their stories. There were also beliefs, quiet, old ones passed down through sailors for centuries. Some believed that the sea itself had moods. When it was calm, it meant it was content. When it raged, it was hungry, and when a man died upon it, his spirit became part of the tide. These thoughts were not born of superstition alone, but of respect. You could not live with the sea and not sense that it was alive in its own way. Sometimes after a storm, the pirates would gather in silence, staring out at the horizon. The air would still taste of salt and fear, but there was relief too. They had survived again, and in that survival they found peace. The cold no longer felt so cruel. The vastness of the water no longer seemed so empty. Each man standing there on the deck was a small part of something greater than himself, a world that moved with tides, stars, and wind, ancient and unbroken. For those who spent their lives chasing freedom, this was the truest form of it. Not gold, not power, but a kind of surrender. The sea could take everything, yet it also gave them everything that mattered: purpose, belonging, and the deep, calm understanding that life and death were not enemies, but neighbors.